Like to encourage you to turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate. Let's stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll kick the meeting off.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think it's very fitting that we start this particular work session with the pledge, since this is the anniversary of the war that the attack on Pearl Harbor. We hope we never have an experience like that again. Tonight's meeting is really a continuation of the meeting we started with.
Mayor, I need to call the roll real quick.
Oh, thank you.
Councilmember Dalby?
Here.
Councilmember Myers?
Here.
Councilmember Rowe? Councilmember Stevens?
Here.
Councilmember Strebe?
Here.
Mayor Lazio?
Here. Thank you for that, Amanda. And we also need to approve the agenda for tonight. I'm looking at two different agendas here, so move the approval of the agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Strebe?
Yes.
Okay. And we also have on our agenda the opportunity for citizen input. So if there's anyone in the audience that wants to address the council, please give us your name and address, and we'll call you up at the appropriate time. Seeing none, we'll move on to the goal-setting session, which is why we're here. As I started to say, this is really a continuation of the meeting that we had with Mr. Schott from the University of Iowa Institute of Public Affairs. And so, Jeff, I know you and Andy have had some communication and discussion, so I'd like to turn it over to you and Andy and have you go ahead and get started. Getting a little feedback here. I hope that'll...
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Just for the record, I'm Jeff Schott with the Institute of Public Affairs at the University of Iowa. And the purpose of tonight's session is what I want to do is just very quickly recap with you the strategic focus areas, the priority goals that you had identified at the goal-setting session in October. Also go through quickly the ongoing commitments and obligations. But the main thing we want to do tonight is looking at those new priorities and new initiatives that the council had identified in October and really talk about implementation of those priorities, talk about what are the action steps, who's going to be doing them, talk a little bit about timelines, talk about if there are any impediments or other issues that need to be discussed. And so that's what we plan to do. And we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. In October, you had identified the priority city goals and the strategic focus areas, the same as in the previous year: economic development, housing, recreation, customer service, pride in community, streets and sewers, and airport development. And then you had a list of ongoing commitments, ongoing obligations. These are projects, activities that are underway, the council has committed to do. And again, I don't expect we don't need to spend much time on these, but just to just refresh everybody's memory, there's a sewer separation project, street repair and reconstruction, implementation of capital projects per your capital project budget, compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, pursuing development and infrastructure in the corridor north towards the airport, continuing code enforcement activities, including the Section 657A program, and that would be expanded to include commercial properties, continuing implementation of your long-range park plan and legacy foundation riverfront renaissance. Then, there's a few more. Yep, there we go. Updating the personnel policies, continuing your current economic development programs, developing and marketing the airport business park and property development, maintaining public safety levels and evaluating service levels in other city departments, recodification of your city code, continuing downtown revitalization and facade improvements, developing a comprehensive facilities maintenance repair program, customer service training, entryway signage, and evaluating city incentives to promote housing development. Those are all underway and ongoing commitments. But the next slide, these are the projects we want to concentrate on tonight. These were new projects. As Mayor indicated, I met with the city administrator earlier today. I think he has some comments as we go through these, and there may be some opportunities for staff. But let's just start with number one. These are listed in order of priority in terms of the votes that they received. Number one, updating the comprehensive plan. As I understand it, that's a project that's being worked on, but I don't know if Andy, if you had.
Mr. Mayor, if it's all right. That's right. Jeff and I talked about this earlier this afternoon. That's really more of a task, and certainly the other staff members can speak to this better than I can. I believe the funding, the requisite funding for this is in the CIP. This is an update. It's more than just an update. It's a complete overview of the existing comprehensive plan. I don't know the year the last comp plan was done. I have 2005 or something on the brain, something like that. It's a little dated. This does unfold into a number of other items that we have listed, but quite frankly, this is really more of a task than anything else at this point.
But it's obviously going to entail a lot of staff time. Your Planning and Zoning Commission, of course, will be involved. By state law, they are required to review and develop a comprehensive plan to submit to the City Council for your review. There's a number of public hearings, the citizen involvement process. So this is a very important project, obviously. Questions, comments?
Jeff, I don't know whether this is an appropriate time to maybe ask a little bit about where we are in that process. I know it's a staff function at this point, but I don't think we've done any. I don't think we've let bids on this or anything, have we? Okay, I didn't think so. All things being equal, that probably start to take shape then spring 17, I'm guessing, based on the conversation we've had, which, that's when most comp plans are launched. So again, it's a task.
And typically those types of projects, can't speak to Ottumwa, but typically it takes about 12 to 24 months to from start to finish. So it is fairly extensive, obviously.
When we get to this part, you may.
Number two, we talked about at the goal setting session, but in visiting with Andy, I think there's a number of issues that we want to talk about tonight with regard to implementing new economic development strategies. You had identified as an ongoing commitment continuing your current economic development programs, but there are a variety of new economic development strategies that were discussed at the session in October. And the first one is, in my opinion, extremely important: existing business visits. And one of the things we need to talk about, I think, is just who's going to do it and what are you expecting out of that. I used to work in economic development a number of years ago in Cedar Rapids. That was by far the number one top strategy. All of the data will tell you that most of your economic development activity comes from existing business. And meeting with existing business, finding out who's struggling, finding out what are their issues. That's really, really important. And I realize there's an economic development organization in town. But in terms of what are you looking for in terms of existing business visits and providing the information and who's actually going to make the visits, that's an important discussion item, I think.
If I may just speak to that briefly, and Jeff and I talked about this afternoon, and this really ties into the third goal, which is economic development roundtable, establish economic development roundtable. The city is, and from what I see, the primary entity that's doing the outreach. The existing business visits, that was something I started last spring. Some of that, as I've shared with council members, is endemic to the conversations we were having this summer regarding the franchise tax. And we'll get to that in a moment. I believe that is just as Jeff pointed out, visiting with all the industries is vitally important. We should be doing that more than once a year. And as I shared with some of the council members, I know when I was out in the industrial park, I had more than a couple of industries say, this is the first time anyone from the city or OEDC has come out and visited with us about something other than a code violation. To that point, I think it is fair to say from a staff perspective, we're contracting with OEDC to perform certain economic development services for us. I don't know the extent. I'm sure that Sharon Stroh, the executive director of OEDC, is doing some of those. I was with her in a meeting where we went to JBS and she was doing a survey. I don't know that that's particularly coordinated very well. I would just soon have the city do them separately. I think, in my opinion, OEDC should be doing them as well, because my purpose when I go and visit with the manufacturers is finding out what they like and what they don't like about city operations. But I think council and staff, particularly council, needs to address that, the void as it is right now, I would argue, with the industry site visits with OEDC.
If I may, because I think, Mr. Schott, your point and my experience on the council, that's an area we always have good intentions, but in my whole experience, we always fall short. So I appreciate what you're saying, City Administrator, but do we need some kind of a flow chart or some kind of a quarterly check, because we still end up not making contacts that I think are essential?
I think it's Councilman Meyer's point is very well taken. I still go back, what I mentioned before. I think it lends itself to the Economic Development Roundtable. And Jeff, as I said, I don't know whether I stole that from you at the seminar. I picked it up at the Iowa League of Cities meeting, but it really is a good idea. Let me just outline this briefly. The city of Clinton, Iowa, had this in their wheelhouse, let's just say, as it relates to economic development tools. And that is, the economic development director there meets on I think it's a quarterly basis then with all the manufacturers, and establish an economic development roundtable. And again, you find out what the manufacturers like, what they do not like. One item that he mentioned, which is something we should do, before I made the industry visits, the cold calling to Illinois this past fall, I had OEDC send me their various and sundry programs, their economic development incentive programs. And there are several of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but he made a good point, and this is something that does need to be done, and that's this. Sit down with not just city staff, but sit down with the manufacturers and figure out, are you using these programs? Is this something that is worth the time and trouble for us to, quite frankly, put together? Because I think in terms of vetting them, you're dealing, and it's a good program, but CDBG was developed back in the early 70s. And as more of these programs become part of the fabric, I think it would be worthwhile maybe bringing down IEDA and having them sit in with us as well and establish these programs are worth pursuing and these are not.
I would add to it too, and I know Bob, are you here? Yeah, I see him. Okay. Bob J. was at a meeting that I attended, and I want to be sure I'm accurate about this, but as I recall, without any notes in front of me, economic incentives were 4th or 5th down the list. And I think that's something that we as a city council need to talk about, because one of the things that came up in that meeting was, what are we known for? What's our destination? What's our branding and image? And those are the kind of things that I think we need to have some council discussion about, because the cities, the industries are shopping cities. They're comparing one city against another. And I think it really helps us to have a pretty good understanding of what's unique about our area that draws people to us. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to really have some discussion at future council meetings about that type of thing. We need to have the incentives, but it's not always the money that's going to bring a business here necessarily.
And in response to Councilmember Meyer's question or comment, I agree. I've been around a lot of these. You do need to have a schedule and who's assigned to an approximate deadline, and somebody has to follow up to make sure those visits are made. I think it's very helpful to have a sheet with some standardized questions. So if you have different people visiting businesses, you're asking the same questions. And a lot of the questions can really lead to some potential economic development prospects. They may have a vendor that they know or a customer that may be expanding. And that's a really good source of information. And so the other part of it is once the contact has been made, communicating the information back, whether it's a complaint, it might not be a complaint about the city, it might be complaining about the post office or whoever, but you need to follow up on that and let them know you followed up on their concern. And it's just good to let your existing businesses know, number one, you appreciate them being in town, you appreciate their activity, their citizenship, and finding out, what's going on. They may be in a growth mode, or maybe they're having some problems. It's good to know that.
Go ahead.
The mayor's comments, and those are good comments. That makes me think two things. One, if I remember correctly, thank you. We had gotten a group together to help brand the city and the city's image, and I'm not sure what the deliverables were on those, but if we're not going to receive any, then we should have discussions and get a group together and talk about, what we think that is, and help develop that image. And that ties into Andy's work in our securing the Buxton group. And I think that they would be beneficial in these conversations when we're talking about who wants to come to Ottumwa and why they want to come here. So the image of the city and the branding of the city, I think, work part and parcel with what the Buxton group is going to do for us as well.
And Mayor, if I might just make one other comment on that, not to reiterate this too much. Usually you don't want to duplicate services, but I do think it wise, and I think the mayor commented on this, to have not only a representative from the city making these industry visits, but in addition to that, having OEDC do this as well. I don't have anything else on that, Mayor, Council.
And since this is a work session, we're going to be very informal. So if you have something you want to add, just go ahead. We're not going to have the formality that we would normally recognize each one of you. And we're here to have a general discussion, and Jeff and Andy can interject anytime. So you don't have to be recognized by the chair of the city. Just as long as it doesn't get too, and we don't override anybody else, we'll let it go pretty loosely. Matt?
I would just make a comment to that. This would be absolutely this goal priority here. Number two, keeping economic development in the sights of the city is absolutely, I think, essential, because we now share not only financially now with OEDC, it is a shared partnership because we share financially now with splitting some of the budget that we had with OEDC in this Buxton study that Councilmember Strebe talked about, hiring on Buxton to do some of that too. And I don't believe it's a duplication of any service or process, because city does play a role in the economic development process, like you talked about, seeing how things are going from a city perspective. What are some of the things that you face as a business? What can we do better from a city? And then OEDC playing a role in how can we help you as a business grow and do those types of things. So I think we all have a role to play now, especially now since we've made those decisions. So I absolutely support those being some goals and priorities in this layout here.
And I think it speaks well to the reorganization efforts of the other groups in town, because one of the criticisms we heard from the survey, and the survey was done by several hundred people in the community, was not done just by the city or the city staff. There was a lot of confusion about who was doing what and what lanes people were operating in. So I think that that's why we wanted to get this reorganization completed. And I think we're going to have a meeting, Andy, in middle of the month to talk more about that. But we've got to get that moving so that everybody is pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, that's very important. And Andy and I were talking about this earlier this afternoon. I hear it all across the state and communities, especially in economic development, where you have multiple agencies, organizations, and what can happen sometimes, there can be some overlap in terms of duties and responsibilities. There also can be some gaps. And it's really important to examine those areas. If there's overlap, let's clean that up, let's straighten up, so everybody knows who's supposed to be doing what. And if there's a gap, you have to address that and make sure that that's being attended to. And that's really important. I hear it all across the state, whether you have economic development groups, something with tourism, some cities have a Main Street group or downtown group, the Chamber of Commerce, the city, sometimes the county. You all need to be able to work together to accomplish your goals.
Mr. Mayor, if I might then, just to, it certainly will take additional comments if council wants to make those, but to somewhat bat cleanup on the establishing the Economic Development Roundtable, that will be done after the first of the year. That's something that will start in our office, and I'll work with OEDC on that. The next item, you see track infrastructure and investments over time. Actually, Bob Jay and Larry Seals have done a very, very good job of that. I've used those statistics more than a couple of times. If council members want to see what that track is in terms of expenditures over a 5 or I think even a 10-year period as it relates to streets and stormwater, we certainly have that. The other item that is listed there, and would like the mayor to speak with this a little bit more, and that's the workforce and working with the school system to develop a skilled workforce.
Had the opportunity to visit with it's called the Indian Hills Regional Development Committee out at Eddyville, Iowa. And that incorporates people from Oskaloosa, the Eddyville complex, and the city of Ottumwa. And overwhelmingly, the concern raised by most of the industries out there was the fact that they're finding it difficult to get a skilled workforce. They have done some work on that, and they are currently going to be working much more closely with Indian Hills in that project. But I think it's something the city needs to stay in touch with and be a part of. Because it seems like it doesn't make any difference what the industry is. We're having difficulty finding people who would just have the skill set both for technical work, but also the soft skills, getting to work every day, being there on time, and being able to put in a full day's effort. So we need to stay in touch with that. And along with that, you've heard me mention once before, at least, that the city has been very active with the C3, which is a Cradle Career and College effort. And that has a group of both business, industry, and school people from Indian Hills and the Ottumwa Community Schools working together to improve the educational outcome of our young people and some retraining for older folks who've been in the workforce for a while and want to move up or try a different skill set. We need to stay on top of that and give them our support. And I think they had their first conference here at Bridgeview this year, and it was a overwhelming success with about 150 people showing up and giving us a good score for the work that we've done. But we need to do a lot more with that, because I think that's probably the number one thing that comes up at any of the meetings I've been at with economic development, is having workforce.
And if I may tie into that, I think when I was looking at these, prior to coming to this meeting, it struck me, and I was aware of the 3 Cs and other things. And locally, I think the high school does an excellent job, Indian Hills, Job Corps, there's so many. But we seem to be falling short, I think, on attitude, expectation type of thing. Because again, today, driving around, I see these help wanted signs out, and it's like, as you said, we're worried about some things, potential businesses we have coming. Do we have the workforce? So how do we continue to work with all of those entities on attitude, expectation? There's a major gap, and I realize those are good things and stuff. But
if it's any consolation, I hear this everywhere I go. All across the state of Iowa, including the metro areas, including Des Moines area and Cedar Rapids area. Everybody, I do a lot of work with economic development groups, so I hear that from employers all the time. 2 issues: workforce, skilled workforce with the skill sets that they need, the employers need. The other issue is housing. Where are the workers going to live? And whether they be entry level or mid-level or professional level, in an awful lot of communities, that's a real concern. So, and the solution, it's got to be everybody working together. It's not the city's problem in and of itself. It's the city and the school district, the community college, the employers. Everybody needs to be able to work together on this problem. And it's not even, it's a problem all across the upper Midwest. It's a huge issue.
Okay.
The other comment I just wanted to say, and when Andy and I were visiting earlier, the one question I asked is, does OEDC have an economic development strategic plan? You know, what is their mission? What are they trying to accomplish? What are their goals? They need to know, of course, and then their partners, such as the city and the county and the other groups, employers, they need to, what is it you're trying to accomplish in terms of economic development? And that's where the existing business becomes a key part of that. And also what, if you talk about attracting new business, what type of new business? And that you look at your assets, what do you have to offer? As was commented, what are your weaknesses? How are you going to address those weaknesses? That's really important. And then what are your expectations of the economic development group in terms of accomplishing these things?
I think we should ask for an update or a follow-up, because we did just had the OEDC director here, and I think we didn't get a clear enough picture as to what money is following those projects. I mean, I think we had 4 or 5 projects that were listed, but how are those going to be funded by whom? And again, is it private money? Is it private and city money? Is it private county and city? You know, so we need to have that clarified, and I think Andy and I can work with Sharon on that.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on economic development? We'll move on to the next one. I don't want to cut short the discussion. Well, the next one, remarketing the beach as an aquatic center. I know Andy received some information from your parks director.
Right. Yeah, to that point, Gene Ratchey actually put together a very good email response in terms of what we're doing right now and what needs to be done additionally to market this as an aquatic center. Without wasting everyone's time, I'm going to send this to all of you, and you please read this. This is not the end game, perhaps. I think it's a very, very good start. In addition to that, as many of you know, the beach is starting to work much more closely with Convention and Visitors Bureau in terms of their marketing and advertising. We visited actually about this topic yesterday at Legacy. There were a series of meetings they had regarding the Riverfront Renaissance and some of the activities that are going to be undertaken primarily with soccer fields. And I was just sharing with the mayor this morning, this came out of that meeting, that most cities I've seen our size are very good at maintenance. And we need to be more than a lawn mowing service in terms of what Parks and Recreation does. The YMCA does a lot of programming. And I can't speak to their maintenance, but I called Tom Sisler this morning, and I have a meeting set up with him early next week to talk about how we might partner together on programming, which they do very well, and we don't do particularly well. And then, of course, maintenance on our end. I look forward to that meeting. I think in addition to that, we probably also need to reach out to the school district. I know the mayor and I have had some conversations with the school superintendent. She's not particularly interested in taking on the beach, and I can't say that I blame her, but we have had some discussions about what can be done by way of programming. I was at the mayor said in those meetings, and if you or council members have anything to add or subtract that, please do.
Any questions about that? I do think there's a lot of opportunity for the community to pull together. We even included, when we said Ottumwa school system, what about the residents out at Job Corps in terms of programming for them? Indian Hills, they don't have a pool. So there are a lot of things we could do. And I think Gene's on the right track with marketing and working with Convention and Visitors Bureau, because that's their specialty. And I think we can do a lot more with just general programming, activities, and recreational opportunities.
Okay, the next item, implement the comprehensive facilities repair and maintenance program. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, one of your ongoing commitments is to develop that plan, that program, and that, as I understand, you've been working on for a while. This is actually to implement it, and that, of course, is going to involve some money, I would imagine. It's going to cost some. One of the questions I asked Andy is whether you had any sort of asset replacement schedule That is an approach that I personally have used. I found it to be pretty successful. We take a look at your various, whether it's equipment or facilities, upgrades, repairs that may be needed, replacements. You have it put on a schedule. You have the expected life, the expected cost, and try to develop a schedule that meets your financial situation. I will guarantee you're going to have more needs than you have money. I don't know that much about Ottumwa. I know that for sure, because every city's got the same problem. But it really helps you in terms of looking at priorities too. So you can't do everything. You're going to have to prioritize. And I know Andy was talking about some projects for to enhance sustainability, energy conservation, those types of things that could easily fit into that category. You have a capital improvements program. I understand that's usually for new projects or additions or extensions. This would be for those, I'll call it routine replacements, but those can be really expensive, and how do you budget for those? So, and it really forces you to look at everything at the same time, which I think is very beneficial.
I think we've got a good start, and I know Public Works has done a good job, and we've done this with our fleet committee, for example, with vehicles and equipment, but we also have capital investments here, this building, other buildings we own, Bridgeview is another one. The waterworks, we were talking about that. We just had a plan or at least a discussion about maybe we need to do a facility plan. So those are some of the things we need to be having some work sessions and discussions about, because I think we are getting to a point where you can't let things go. That's what we found out about the beach. If you let it go, it's going to be more expensive down the road.
I would just add to that, the key element of that, of course, is financing. And if you take the asset replacement program, Jeff, as you suggested, and marry together both the energy audit component and then the facilities component, that's probably a much better way of, quite frankly, putting them under one roof. We started off with the facilities maintenance plan, and again, the folks in Public Works can speak to this far better than I can. I would argue there's been a very good schedule that's put together that somewhat got dialed back a little bit because the energy audits really took precedence. Alliant Energy contacted us a year ago. I believe it was in actually November of last year when we had contact with them. And Dwight Dolman, our city engineer, has done a very good job, as has Larry Seals, the Public Works Director, in setting forth those areas that need attention and also have a fairly quick turnaround. And as I've shared with Bob Jay, the finance director, we need to start putting those, certainly the energy audits, we need to just start putting those in departments' budgets. Before we decide to buy a new car or a new item, we need to bear down on those. But I think I give a lot of credit to Dwight. I think he's done a very good job. I'm not in favor of hiring a maintenance person to head that up. That's another expense we don't need to assume. I think anyway, he's done a very good job in working in concert with Public Works and establishing that schedule. Others may have differing opinions or suggestions or something.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the next one was explore instituting a utility franchise tax. And again, I'm not personally knowledgeable as to how much the council's looked into this in the past, but certainly looking into it and going through the process, identifying what revenues would be generated, because you can establish that tax at the level, there's a maximum, but you can go up from 1%, 2%, up to, I think, maximum of 5%. And also your attorney, city attorney, advising you in terms of the process that has to be followed to take that on. I will tell you, this issue is being looked at a lot by cities all across the state, particularly with respect to whether or not the backfill is going to be continuing for the property tax changes that were adopted by the state legislature a few years ago. A number of cities are very concerned whether the backfills is going to continue for very many years, and this might be the last year this year. You know, the guarantee ends in fiscal year 18. Will it continue or not? Who knows? I know it was a point of honor with the governor to continue because he made a promise in that regard. I understand he's getting himself a new job. So everything's going to be out on the table, I think. So again, I'll just leave it at that. This is not saying you're doing it. It's saying you're going to explore it. I think it's very prudent in terms of looking at that and the what's it going to generate in terms of revenues and how those revenues would be used.
And to share the conversation Jeff and I had this afternoon, the instituting utility franchise tax was an item that received a great deal of discussion. Actually, back in the spring of this year was when we started talking about this. Joni Keith, our city attorney, a strategy that we agreed to. I'm not sure where we are on the process of still putting the franchise fee, the ordinance anyway, in front of the council. As some of you may or may not know, there are discussions with Alliant Energy maybe looking for some rather significant increases in their rates, for as high as 10%. And we just did a little quick back of the envelope math, and it was pretty easy to figure out that staff's recommendation is to take this in front of the voters and let them speak to it. That vote would perhaps not exactly coincide, but be very, very close to about the same period of time that they would be thinking about their 10%. Right, so not exactly a marriage made in heaven. So that was one reason we dialed that back. I do believe, based on my conversations with Ms. Keith, that this is an item, though, that we're going to try and put in front of council and set that, I believe, at a zero rate. And if Mayor, if Joni could speak to that for just a minute, that would be beneficial.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We did bring that before council in November.
Okay.
And we passed the ordinance of franchise agreement with the 0%. And then we're going to take a look at it in the next couple of years and see if things change a little bit in the community. But at this point, you've passed the agreement with a 0%.
And that gives us plenty of time to also finish contacting our major businesses that would be affected by that. So we have more. Okay.
And we've laid the groundwork for that. I started contacting the manufacturers actually this past summer and visited with them about the merits and demerits of it. I think if we set that at 1%, it generated something like an additional $300,000 or $340 or something like that. And staff was recommending at that point that would go towards streets and roads. But again, that is an item to deal with going forward with the council.
And I don't know what the backfill amounts to here in Ottumwa, but that's what a lot of cities are just looking at that as replacement funding.
Right.
Number tied for fifth, updating your annexation study and strategy. As I understand it, you did do an annexation study a number of years ago. This would be updating it, especially in light of the new transportation improvements. And that could very easily be tied into your comprehensive plan because that's also going to be looking at land use issues. But that sounds like that'd be a very important area. And the key issue of strategy becomes important. You know, there's two different forms of annexation under Iowa law. There's voluntary annexation, which is relatively easy. That's the consent of the property owner. Involuntary annexation is very difficult under Iowa law. Not impossible, but difficult. It requires a vote of the people, not only in the area to be annexed, but the community itself, the city of Ottumwa. But it also requires that the city must extend city improvements, city services to that annexed area. If it's an involuntary annexation, you have to do that within 36 months. And if you don't, the annexation is void. Well, what is that going to cost? That's something you need to study. A lot of times, I was telling Andy this, a lot of times cities look at annexation as strictly revenues. Well, there's an expenditure side to it as well. You need to know that. I know that's something, it sounds like that the staff has already started looking at that, and I don't know if there's some
of that's set forth on that map over there, and this is something that council ultimately needs to weigh in on, and not just set by staff, but I know both Kevin Flanagan, our planner, and Larry Seals, the Public Works Director, did a lot of work on identifying potential annexation areas. And there are probably more than one. What we tried to concentrate on was, quite frankly, the bypass. Because like most cities, you increase traffic flow at the bypass. They circle around the city. You lose the sales tax dollars. So there were a couple of different areas that were in mind. One was at the apex, essentially would be 149 and US 63. There was another one a little south of Dahlonega, and I think there was another one a little bit further south. Now, Kevin and I talked about this today, and I think this makes much more sense, and that would be, instead of drafting an annexation study, it wouldn't be a plan, a study, we have the resources to, quite frankly, do that in-house already. Larry Seals has pulled back some archival information that would be pretty easy to put together. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend $50,000, $60,000 on a study when most of that work, if not already done, can certainly be done in-house. Again, though, this has to be something the council is comfortable with. And Jeff, as you just said, the discussion about identifying areas is one thing. The utility costs are certainly a big contributing factor. And then the other, as you said, big delta between voluntary and involuntary annexations. Those don't happen overnight.
And developing a strategy, developing a council policy, I think will be very important. If you identify areas that you want to have annexed into the city, what some cities have found to be quite successful is they've established a policy that if a property outside the city limits wants to connect to city sewer or water, they have to agree to annex to the city. And that because they're receiving city services. Even if they're not contiguous, they can agree to annex at the time they become contiguous. So again, that's what works for Ottumwa. You'll have to figure that out, but there should be some policies in place so that when development occurs, you're faced with these issues, you can tell them this is the city's policy on this particular
Well,
matter.
and personally, as a council person, and we found out just recently, like for fire codes, Quail Creek, which is almost 5 miles or is 5 miles from the city limits, but they agreed to the annexation, and so they do benefit. They can with some insurance companies. But personally, when we talk about voluntary, involuntary, and then there's some percentages,
80-20 is called.
80-20, and then it's like, Kevin, I mean, last night, a Birchwood Hill situation and everything, it's like, well, what could we do there? And economically, maybe we couldn't do the sewer part. But if they would agree, and this is just fictitious, it's just an example. But if they would agree to voluntary, and gee, what could we offer then if we can't get up into that area with sewers and so forth? But boy, when you throw out the fire protection, police protection, roads, snow plowing, all of those variables, that must be why some areas do agree to annexation. So I would sure hope we could get some
There's also a
information.
provision in the state code that allows the cities to gradually abate the difference in taxes between city taxes and county taxes over a period of time, because that seems to be one of the biggest issues is, well, the city tax is higher than the county tax for residential properties, but you can abate it. I believe it's over a period of 5 years. You have to check on that. But again, is that a policy that you want to offer or not? That's something, just like say you look at your economic development incentives, you should look at these policies and see what is in the best interests of Ottumwa.
And we need to know. I think Quail Creek, just from memory, Jeff, I think was 10 years, but maybe it was.
Again, I can't remember right off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Good. Any other comments about that? I just want to be sure this is all, again, sharing of ideas and information. We're not making any decisions tonight, but the more input we have, the better off as we think about this. Okay, go ahead.
And then the last one, riverfront development. I know there's been a lot of work that has been done on that and planning. I'll turn it over to Andy, who can, I think, update the council.
I'm just updating from the meeting that we had. There were a series of meetings, plural, that Legacy had at their headquarters yesterday with various and sundry stakeholders. And they set forth what the meetings may have been different. The one I was at, they did not go through verse in scripture where all the soccer fields were going to be positioned. But that really was the focal point of the conversations is, and they have a firm that'll do some sort of analysis that will ascertain whether or not it's worth it from a cost perspective and a revenue perspective, and then to build these soccer fields, and you're going to get tournaments and capitalize those costs expeditiously. I'm not an expert on soccer, so I can't tell you whether or not it is growing as an endeavor and as a sport. These people that were doing the study seem to feel that there is, but they were also mindful of the fact that there also are costs associated with it, particularly with the fields. One question that I had at that meeting was, if these soccer fields are developed, then it's somewhat like if you upgrade and increase your air conditioning units, that's great, but your costs are going to go up. And if that's going to be the case, as I pointed out, we have essentially 6 park maintenance people. So is this something that's contracted out in terms of maintenance with Legacy or another entity? From a cost perspective, that would really be difficult for us to pull off. And it goes back again to the question of programming, but still, it's a very, very, very large cost. And Brad Little at Legacy Foundation acknowledged that.
Yeah, this is another theme I'm hearing all across the state. Cities may have built, and counties do, for built projects, activity, could be trails, or got grants to build them. That's great, but then there's operations and maintenance. And sometimes, especially with rec centers and community centers and sports complexes, they say, well, we'll charge membership fees, we'll charge registration fees, they'll cover the costs. And a lot of times they get gloriosky, pie in the sky projections. They didn't come out quite as good as they thought, and then there's a gap. And where's that money going to come from, especially if you've got tight budgets to begin with? It's out of your 810 levy, and you got other competing forces there. So it's really important question to ask yourself: how are we going to pay for the upkeep, operation, maintenance, whether it's the park facility or any other project that you're building these days?
Well, I think it ties in very nicely with, Andy, and I just had a little sidebar here, that the Riverfront Renaissance Plan is a very long-term major change in some of the activity of both the park and the parkway. But there's got to be a schedule and a timetable. You can't do something that major overnight. But this meeting the other day, I was really pleased to see the variety of public input that was given to those meetings. I mean, we had people from John Q. Citizen to the athletic director to city staff to trails people, just a variety of people looking at this. And as Andy said, the feasibility study will come back in the spring of this year, of coming year 17. And at that time, we'll have probably an opportunity to have more detailed discussion of who, what, where, when, and how much, because that's where the detail is. But it was a good start, and I think council's been asking, well, how are we interfacing with that Riverfront Renaissance Plan? And this is just one of the low-hanging fruits that we can get started on and have some significant impact on. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted. And several of you had the opportunity to sit in on some of those sessions yesterday, so glad to have your input.
Well, just to wrap up, what I would recommend, once you've finished with this process, staff putting together an action plan for implementing your priorities, both your ongoing and your new initiatives, identifying what are the action steps, who's going to do them, timelines, and then what's really important in my view is periodically reviewing the status of implementing these with the council on a regular basis. I suggest maybe quarterly, so you keep those goals, keep those priorities in front of you. That doesn't mean you can't have new priorities. You may have a big new economic development prospect, And all of a sudden that becomes top priority. I understand that. Or I hope this doesn't happen, but sometimes you have weather events, floods or winds, that becomes a top priority. But at the very least, you want to try to make sure you keep on top of those goals, keep on top of those priorities, and also, of course, communicate your goals and priorities to your boards and commissions, your staff, of course, but most importantly, to the citizens, to the other stakeholders in the community, other local governments, the school board, the county, economic development board, other hospital board, whatever you have in your community, just let them know these are the goals that the city is going for.
Jeff, I want to clarify one thing, and just maybe I missed it. Where does the airport fit into your thinking on this whole process? I mean, it's on our last year's airport development as a strategic focus, but we didn't mention anything about that. And it's been a personal issue for me that I think our airport is a diamond in the rough. And we're going to be meeting with our engineering firm later this month, and we want to have some discussion with them. It also ties in with the development up the roadaways, Pella and Oskaloosa, and I think we just need to have more council input on that so that we can figure out what our policy is going to be.
Yeah, you've identified as an ongoing commitment the develop and market the airport business park and property development there. Yeah, that's certainly an issue in terms of infrastructure, and I don't know what you have. You also have as an ongoing commitment just to continue your capital improvements program, and I would imagine you have projects in there related to the airport. That is a fundamental issue, and certainly in terms of economic development, gets back to that economic development strategic plan. How important is the Ottumwa Airport to your economic development strategy? In most communities, the airport's fundamental. But again, I can't speak to your situation here. But that's
We just
certainly
had,
something
Andy and
that
I
has to
had
be
the opportunity
discussed.
this afternoon to talk to a pilot from out of state who flies into over 100 different airports across the country. And, it's only one pilot and one comment, but I think it's significant. He said we have one of the nicest facilities, and he thinks it's something we really need to develop more. And I just share that with you because that's not me talking. That's not city administrator. That's a pilot who flies across country and has a lot of experience with airport. He was very positive about the service and the care he got when he landed here. And those are the things that we don't talk about here enough, I think, the good work that's being done out there. So just share that with you.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of doing an economic development strategic plan, is really identifying what are your strengths. And if it's the airport, it may be your highway, it may be sewer capacity, water capacity. What are your weaknesses? You need to capitalize on those strengths, you need to address those weaknesses, and then develop a plan to meet those.
Are there questions for Jeff from any of the council, any of the staff? I want to be sure staff have a chance to ask anything or comment on anything that's been talked about tonight, because again, we depend on you for a lot of recommendations and input, and council doesn't often get a chance to hear. I sit in on some of the staff meetings, and I think we have some good discussion there, but this is your chance to just share things with them too. So are there any comments you want to make? Any questions for our staff?
They sure do an outstanding job.
Well, I've said, and I'll say this here again, I assume this is being broadcast. When I've been asked to speak to civic groups, church groups, activities, social groups here in town, I think we have a great staff that do a lot of hard work and don't get enough credit for the things they do. We always hear about the complaints and the problems, as most cities do. But people come and work hard every day, and we've got a great bunch of people that really want to see the city move forward, and I think this is the opportunity to have that kind of input.
Mr. Mayor, if I might just add one other item, Jeff, that's listed here, and that's the importance of the quarterly updates. Yes. This was another one that Jeff mentioned at Iowa League of Cities meeting, and as it ties back to timelines, I think I know it would be a good idea to put together a committee. I wouldn't make it a very large committee, maybe consisting of 4 individuals, maybe 5, and just have them conduct follow-up on the strategic initiatives we have. I would venture say I'd like to see if we could maybe have 2 elected representatives and maybe 2 or 3 staff. We haven't made up how that would be comprised, but it's vitally important. I think it speaks in ringing tones what you mentioned, Jeff, at the Iowa League of Cities meeting, that a lot of cities do that. Because if you don't, if there isn't a consistent follow-up, again, these plans are folded up and put in a closet somewhere. So that's an item I'm going to be working on very quickly before the end of the year.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments? Your last chance. Okay, hearing none. Is there any public comment? Anybody? Hearing none, then I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Strebe?
Yes.
6:26.
Thank you.